No matter how much he tries to distance himself, JD Vance is in the Epstein administration. We cannot think of this cover-up as something that is only being carried out by Donald Trump, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, and Todd Blanche. This is an administration-wide effort because all of them are affected and all of them should be criminally liable for the cover-up and the obstruction of justice that they have committed. And that includes JD Vance. And I think more than anyone in this administration, he is well aware of that. He has tried to keep his distance, but Thomas Massie isn't letting him with a post that JD Vance feared the most because it exposes his criminality, how implicated he is, but also it is a warning shot for what is to come for Vance in the 2028 Republican primary, of course, the thing he thinks about most. But it all begins with, I think, how perfectly Thomas Massie described this entire Epstein administration and why this is the biggest scandal we have ever seen.
And by the way, I think historically when we look back at the Epstein scandal, it's going to be bigger than Watergate. And it's going to be, by the way, the president didn't go to jail, the attorney general did. It's going to be bigger than Iran-Contra. And here's why. It spans 4 administrations. It's deeper than any political thing on the surface. And so I think in terms of the number of people who are affected, I mean, how many people were affected by Iran-Contra, okay, or Watergate? I mean, specifically in that instance. Obviously, everybody's affected when there's a lack of transparency and bad or fraudulent things happening. But I mean, directly affected or implicated, that was a finite group of people in both of those. Here we have what seems to be almost an infinite number of people involved with Jeffrey Epstein. At least we don't even know yet how many there were in the criminal enterprise or the seedy part of it.
No one in this administration should ever be able to escape the fact that they participated in this cover-up. That no matter what you did at the DOJ, if you so much as poured a cup of coffee for Pam Bondi, you are implicated. And everyone in and around Donald Trump who has tried to deflect or feed the media lies to distract them, as JD Vance has openly admitted to, this is a guy who said on the campaign trail he would happily make up stories and lie to the media because that was the only way he could get them to facilitate his narrative. He admitted this when Donald Trump was talking about the cats and the dogs who were being eaten in Springfield, Ohio, a blatant lie that JD Vance admitted to. And now he's been deflecting and staying away mostly from the Epstein saga. But when he was confronted on it, he showed us, 1, how he's implicated, and 2, why he's just such a bad messenger before we get into the post that Massie made.
Well, I mean, I've been pretty occupied the last couple of days. I haven't seen Howard getting calls to resign. We'll follow the story a little bit more closely as I get on the plane. But, you know, fundamentally, I think the Epstein files, what they reveal is certainly you had a lot of very wealthy and powerful people who were involved in some very disgusting behavior. But I do find it's interesting that the congressional Democrats are so focused on attacking the President of the United States. Who's the president who actually authorized the release of these files? It was Donald Trump. And they, you know, what really bothers me about this is that they take completely unsubstantiated attacks against the president, some of which are like completely facially absurd. I mean, the most absurd claim that I saw is that Donald Trump was engaged in sex trafficking when he was a teenage boy, meaning when the president was himself a teenager. Some of this stuff you just have to say, obviously that's ridiculous.
JD Vance does the same thing that we see from Donald Trump, that I'm not giving them advice, certainly, but it is a complete mistake if you are trying to get us to stop talking about the Epstein files. Vance, in the same breath as he says, well, I don't really know much about the files, and I haven't looked at Howard Lutnick, and I'm sure it's no big deal. Why are we even talking about this? Says, well, it seems like Donald Trump hated Jeffrey Epstein. He reported him. He was a wonderful guy. Well, then why wouldn't you want that released? Why are you standing in the way of that information coming out? All we've seen are reports that allege crimes or show crimes that Donald Trump committed. And you're telling me he was a great guy? When Carolyn Levitt talked about that alleged call that Donald Trump made to the authorities, that's what she called it, an alleged call about Epstein, because they haven't decided yet if they want Donald Trump to be a guy who in the early 2000s knew about Epstein's crimes or not, because they still haven't decided if that's better for their narrative. Donald Trump continued to engage with Epstein after the fact, and he's known about it this entire time. Clearly, so is JD Vance, or at least maybe he pretended that he didn't back when it was politically expedient. And that is the post that Massie made that is a huge blow to Vance, not just in the Republican primary, but of course, it's implicating him criminally. So if you remember, back in 2021, during the Biden administration, JD Vance shared a story about Jeffrey Epstein and tweeted, "Remember when we learned that our wealthiest and most powerful people were connected to a guy who ran a literal child sex trafficking ring, and then that guy died mysteriously in a jail, and now we just don't talk about it?" Thomas Massie responded, "Some of us never forgot, JD." Back in 2021, when JD Vance was launching his political career, I guess launching it in his elected political career, running for Senate, financed with the biggest individual donation we have ever seen to a single Senate campaign, a single race, coming from who? JD, who gave you $15 million? Was it Peter Thiel, who emailed extensively with Epstein, had plenty of dinners with Epstein, hung out with Epstein, talked about destabilizing states in the Middle East for their financial benefit? These two guys who wanted to disrupt the global financial system and were going to infiltrate government officials to make sure that could happen so that they could expand their wealth? Because it sounds like that's what Peter Thiel's doing right now through you, JD, that he's made plenty of money through infesting, I should say, our government with his AI technology that is meant to surveil you and me, that Palantir is exploding and exploding the pockets of Thiel, that he has connections to all of the national security secrets that he could want. It seems like Donald Trump is going pretty far in destabilizing the American dollar and currency more broadly. So it seems like Peter Thiel is getting all he wants. And JD Vance has moved on. JD Vance in 2021, when it was about Joe Biden, really wanted to talk about Epstein. And now he doesn't. And why that is so scary to him, one, is because JD Vance is part of this cover-up. He doesn't have to be the attorney general or the deputy attorney general, work at the DOJ. He will be implicated in the obstruction of justice. JD Vance has broken and is breaking the law all the same as anyone else in this administration. They are all a part of this. This is an Epstein administration. But what might even be worse for Vance, who only cares about one thing in the world, and that is the Republican primary in 2028, should be incredibly unsettled that the right flank that he tried to dominate, the guy who has been more cruel and disgusting, and I guess you could use the term conservative than anybody else in a potential field, is now being outflanked by Thomas Massie, a guy who will run against JD Vance in this primary for president in 2028 on an issue he can do nothing about because he is implicated. An issue that might dominate that 2028 primary. Who was and was not fighting against the Epstein class? JD Vance is losing. So the guy who's going to be one of his bigger opponents is already outflanking him, hitting him where it hurts the most, and implicating him in doing so. That is not a good sign for JD Vance's political career, and it is going to have him in constant combat with Donald Trump over the next couple of years. Because he both doesn't want to talk about Epstein, but also wants to get on the record putting some distance between him and himself. Tim Dillon, who is a kind of conservative presenting podcaster who's friends with Vance, who interviewed him, who was supportive of Donald Trump. This is a guy that JD Vance many months ago told at a dinner, well, we have to release the whole files. We have to. It'd be such a mistake if we didn't, right? Trying to play both sides. But it's difficult to do so when Thomas Massie is constantly reminding you of the cover-up that Vance and everyone in this administration is involved in. That is a big problem for JD Vance. It is why actively right now, they are of course trying to muddy the waters. They are trying to distract us. They are trying to keep us from focusing on Epstein. But I think Ro Khanna did a great job breaking down how and how we can fight back against it.
Carson Connor, you have now been officially informed that you have 100% of the Epstein files.
Well, that's just wrong. And it's not just Thomas Massie and I who are now calling it out, not just Marjorie Taylor Greene who's calling it out. People like Tim Burchett, people like Nancy Mace are saying this is just not transparent. Even Senator Kennedy is saying this is not transparent. And the reality is they're muddying the water. I mean, instead of focusing on people like Lutnick, people like the ambassador in Turkey, people like the Stephen Bannon, who had actual correspondence or relationships with Epstein, they're just putting out every public figure. And not only is that letting off people who actually may have been involved in illegal or immoral behavior, but it's also breeding such cynicism because, as your monologue showed, there are people like President Obama who didn't get anywhere close to this, who are decent, who are moral, who believe in the rule of law and America's character. And for them to try to conflate everyone is a terrible disservice to democracy.
What are your next steps?
Well, we're contemplating several things. Nancy Mace has actually offered an idea of whether we have to have another legislative approach in Congress to clarify further the law. And remember, Lawrence, the first bill passed 427 to 1 and 100 to 0 in the Senate. So there are veto-proof majorities that we could have. There are survivors who could bring a case before Judge Engelmeyer and Judge Berman in the Southern District of New York. Thomas Massie or I may bring that case. We, as you recall, asked for a special master for this purpose. Now, Judge Engelmeyer ruled that we needed to actually bring a motion, an actual case, and we're contemplating that.
The Epstein files, unless they're destroyed by this administration, and Donald Trump gives pardons to the people who destroy them, will be there when a Democrat wins the White House next time, presumably in the next presidential election, and a new attorney general. What do you anticipate they might be doing in the Justice Department in anticipation of someday having to hand over to a Democratic attorney general the Epstein files?
I believe they're trying to cover up as much as they can of people close to the president or in his network. I mean, we know that the FBI already scrubbed these files with redactions, and we don't know where the existing files are. But I don't want to wait 3 years. I mean, you have France saying that they're going to prosecute anyone who's involved. New Mexico just today said they want to open up an investigation into the ranch. You have other nations that are holding their government leaders accountable and wanting to investigate. And only in the United States of America is our DOJ saying we're done, we want to move on.
The Epstein cover-up is an operation not just from the DOJ, but from the right-wing media as well. You are already starting to hear right-wing pundits describe Epstein's victims as alleged victims or supposed victims, trying to take away their power and their stories, trying to strip them of the justice that they deserve before they can even try and get it. People are making jokes, making light, pretending that, oh, well, everyone was involved, but really no one was involved. They want to muddy the waters. We cannot allow that to happen. We're not going to on this show.